In today's video, I'm going to be demoing and reviewing the new Natasha Denona My Dream Cheek Trio. I've previously demoed and reviewed, did a kind of first impressions on the My Dream Eye Palette and the Natasha My Dream Lipstick. But today I've got the Cheek Trio in new, and I'm also going to be trying to dupe this Natasha Denona palette as well as I can with my other Natasha Denona palettes. I'm going to use one palette on each eye, the original palette and the dupe palette, just to see how close I can get the look with my dupe palette. So if you'd like to see all of that, just keep on watching. So I fully swatched both the My Dream palette and my dupe palette, which is made up of a combination of a number of Natasha Denona's other midi palettes. I decided to stay away from her larger pan palettes and just stick to the midis with this. And I also didn't include the Metropolis palette because I just felt like I had quite a lot to work with anyway with the other midi palettes that I had. Just so you can see the palettes themselves, here is the original, the My Dream palette. And here is my dupe palette. And I wasn't able to find anything close in her midi range to that multi-chrome shade that's in the My Dream palette, so I pulled a shade from the Trio Chrome palette, but it's a larger pan, so it doesn't actually fit into the pan here, but I felt like that was my best option to try and dupe that other shade because there was really nothing else similar in her midi range. And here we have both palettes side by side. And I'll show you the swatches side by side as well. And you can see, I think I did a fairly good job of getting the overall color story to feel pretty similar, but it was actually really difficult to find exact dupes for each shade. Some were a little easier than others and some were really difficult. I knew I didn't have a black shade in the midi size, so I just went with like a really dark brown for that. This dupe palette is composed of 4 shades from the Glam palette, 4 shades from the Bronze palette, 1 from Retro, 2 from Love, and 3 from Sunrise. So those were ultimately what I decided on. I'm going to list all those shades and the palettes that they're from below in order in the description box. And there were, of course, contenders for certain shades from other palettes. Like there were a few from Retro. I ended up only going with 1, but there were a few that could have subbed in. And the same with all the other palettes. There were a few different options for most of these colors, but I just tried to go with what I could find that was the closest to the shades in the My Dream palette. And then I did this look using both palettes. And again, you'll be able to see in the footage where I'm applying these 2 palettes to my eyes that I was able to get an overall pretty similar look on both eyes. But on the way there, it was a little bit of a challenge with some of the colors really not looking all that similar on the eyes. I found that the biggest difference though between the dupe palette and the real palette was the texture of the shimmer shades. The shimmers and metallics in the My Dream palette have a lot more of that kind of celestial, sparkly kind of quality than I found most of the shimmers in my dupe palette did. And I also find that there are a lot more shifty colors, a lot more duochromes in the My Dream palette than I was able to pull from the other palettes. So I think she's really done a lot of work to develop those duochrome formulas, as well as adding in the kind of sparkling textures that we don't necessarily see in a lot of the other midi palettes. And I'm not sure if it will come across on camera, but maybe you can see that comes through in the final looks. I find the side I did with the dupe palette is just a little bit duller. It doesn't have quite that kind of celestial, sparkly, real dimension and brightness that I find I get from the My Dream palette. And overall, although I think that you could get a lot of similar looks from the dupe palette as you can with the My Dream palette, it was harder to dupe than I expected it to be, and there are certainly differences and nuances in the My Dream palette compared to the rest of Natasha Denona's palettes. Now let's move into the cheek palette. So I decided when applying this that I wanted to actually start out with the powder highlighter. I think the typical progression for this palette, or what is expected, is to do the cream blush, then the cream highlighter, and then the powder highlighter over top. But I decided I wanted to kind of mix it up a little bit and just see how it would work. So I went with the powder highlighter first, and I found that that buffed on really nicely. It's a really nice smooth texture. It feels almost like a cream in the pan. It's a beautiful bright color, and it wasn't too blingy. So I kind of liked that it had the balance of being really shiny and reflective and wet looking, but it didn't have that kind of streaky metallic quality that sometimes powder highlighters can have. And it still had a sense of sort of a sheerness and creaminess to it. Then I went in with the cream blush, and I picked up much too much on my brush, so I ended up just having to kind of dab it down a little bit, but I found that it applied really beautifully. It's an interesting texture. I think it's the same as the cream blush that was in her Glam face palettes, because it mostly feels like a powder, but there is this slight kind of creamy slippiness to it that I guess makes it more of that cream or gel formula. Anyway, it applied very beautifully. It really just glided over the skin and blended super easily, no patchiness or anything. And I love the color of it too. This cream blush is said to be basically her Natasha lipstick, which is the lipstick I'm wearing now. By the way, in the demo where I'm applying the cheek palette, I'm actually wearing a different lipstick. I'm wearing Le Mépris from Lisa Eldridge. But I decided to take it off and switch it out again for the Natasha lipstick. And I think the Natasha one just suits the whole look a lot better. So it's a great lipstick to go with this collection for sure. But anyway, the cream blush in this palette is the Natasha shade. I will swatch them next to each other in a moment. And then I went in and just tapped a little bit of the cream highlighter on top, and it just added this really nice kind of glossy finish. But I always like to add a cream highlighter at the end, even when I'm using all powders, or maybe even especially then, because I just find it adds the kind of skin-like look back into the look. So it adds that really fresh, moisturized skin look. And I think this highlighter did a great job of that. It's quite a thin formula, very, very emollient, and it applies very easily onto the skin. So here I have the cream blush Natasha, and that's the Natasha lipstick. And then down here I have the cream blush from the Glam face palette, the light version, which is the one that I have. And I think even the blush shades are pretty similar. The one from the Glam face palette is a little bit cooler looking, but they have really similar looks there. A little bit more peachy warmth, I think, in the Natasha one. And then I can definitely see how the cream blush Natasha is based on the lipstick Natasha. Those look to be quite similar tones. I think the lipstick looks a little bit darker, but that's just because it's more saturated in the swatch. And then I also wanted to just compare the powder highlighter in the new palette to the powder highlighter in the Glam face palette. The texture feels very similar between those two. I'm not sure if it's the same formula, but I find them to be basically the same, and the way they perform on the skin is the same as well. The shades don't look all that dissimilar. What I'm seeing on the screen is that the one from the Glam face palette, which is the one on top here, it just looks a little bit more pinky, I guess. More of a kind of peachy pinky shade, maybe a touch darker than the one from the new palette here, which is looking a little bit, just slightly more of a kind of golden champagne and maybe a little bit lighter. I just wanted to mention I made a mistake in my first impressions video of the eyeshadow palette. I said that the Blackest black shade was a cream to powder, and it's not. It's just the original creamy powder matte black that Natasha has brought out previously, so she didn't change the formula for that one. I was a little bit confused by what she was saying in her Instagram stories when she went through the palette, and I got that mixed up. So it is just the traditional standard creamy powder, not a cream to powder. So that's it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions or comments below. I always love to see those. If you'd like to see more from me and you haven't subscribed to my channel already, I'd love for you to do so. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.